Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the HCD Mindset vidcast. Here we are in season 2, where we have a lot of other people joining us, as you can see. Today's topic, we're going to be talking about we love proof. So those of you that follow along with HCD probably noticed that we have an initiative this year with the new year starting. It's all about prove it. We want to make sure that everybody understands how different methodologies work, as well as how you go about proving your results, or action standards showing that your products are doing what they say they're doing. It's all about providing proof and substantiating proof. So without further ado, we're going to launch right in as usual. Those of you that are new to the vidcast, or those that are returning, my name is Michelle Niedziela, and I'm VP of Research and Innovation at HCD Research, which runs this vidcast. And I'm always joined with Kathryn.
Hi, everybody. Kathryn Ambroze here. I'm the manager of Behavioral and Marketing Sciences. We're very excited to have this Valentine's Day themed We Heart episode. But even to make it more special, we do have some fun guests joining us. And I just really quickly want to introduce our new Science Communications Intern. Alyssa, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Alyssa Rotondo. I'm a first-year student majoring in Neuroscience, and I'm an intern here at HCD Research.
Awesome to have you join us. Those of you that are not familiar with HCD Research, and I just want to give you a little background on us. We are a market research company that uses a bunch of different approaches to get a holistic understanding of how the consumers interact with the stimuli around them. So whether it is products or packaging or communications or whatever it is that a person, the consumer interacts with, we want to see how they are perceiving, evaluating, and responding to that thing. Our applied consumer neuroscience approach uses a range of tools that go across all sorts of aspects of the human experience, from early exploration stages of research all the way through validation, from product marketing all the way communications and validation, from product development all the way through marketing. And it can be done online or in person all around the world. Basically, anywhere you have a research question, we can address those with our tools. That can be anything from neuroscience, psychology, or traditional market research. We are also joined, as you can see, there are 4 of us today, whopping 4 of us. We are joined again with Martha. Martha, introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. I'm Martha Bajec, principal of Bajec SenseWorks Consulting. And consulting director for health and wellness research at HCD. Yes, yep. Very happy for that.
And we really wanted to have Martha on this discussion because of her background in some of the topics we're going to be talking about, such as CBD and some other sort of difficult areas of study, right? The more challenging areas of study, but also because she has a real grounding in science, and conversations that you've probably heard us have with her in the past have really been about how to do science appropriately and effectively. Which is a lot about what our conversation is going to be about today in our Prove It theme. Because there is a real question of what counts as proof. So what are we talking about when we're talking about proof in consumer research, which could be a lot of different things. You can really interpret that idea as applying to all sorts of things. But it's really that difference between subjection, subjective thought and real fact, right?
Absolutely. I think that it's important to talk about how evidence isn't really something that it shouldn't, evidence can be debated, but only to a certain point, where you can debate about a statistical test, or you could debate about, the amount of sample sizes you have to put into a study and things like that. But at the end of the day, you really want to have that sound evidence to be a framework for whatever claim you're trying to make or whatever hypothesis you're trying to prove. Mm-hmm. So keeping that in mind, it's really important to have a differentiation between what's considered a fact and what's considered an opinion, especially because in science, we know that things are constantly changing and constantly evolving. And so we have to move along with it and progress with it for us to really be up to date about what's the best thing to do.
And when it comes to talking with clients, what they're coming to us for is to do research. And so they want proof of something. Typically, that's what the ask is, right? So whether it's they want you to do a survey to find out if people like something, or if they're asking you to do physiological research to show that there is an actual change, they're looking for proof of something. And they want that evidence to have a couple of things to really support that it's an actual fact, right? That it's not chance, right? So you do have to think about the conditions that it was measured in, right? So if we did a survey, who did we do the survey on? When was the survey done? I think that's kind of come up a little bit when we think about this past year, right? Where if you were to send out a survey on stress, let's say, and there's been a lot of stressful factors over this past year, whether it's from pandemic or it's from political strife or just all sorts of global issues going on. There's a lot of stress out there. So if you were just trying to measure some emotional things with your product or marketing, you might get some skewed results a little bit. So when you do look at those numbers, you do have to take condition into consideration. But you also want to find that there's meaningful evidence, right? So there should be statistics done, which it seems obvious, right? Whenever you're doing any type of research, but interestingly, not all research providers out there give statistical analysis to their research. Martha, have you seen any of that in your experience where people aren't running statistics?
Oh, absolutely. And it gets tricky because, often there's a black box of the research. We'll put your data in this way and we'll get some result and we'll give you that. I've had it happen where I get the result and only then do I find you can't do statistical analysis on it because they've really only provided a couple of numbers. So,
right.
So there's nothing to do stats on, right? So obviously there was a disconnect there between expectation and delivery, but significant statistics, like that's just a whole bag of slimy worms. What does that mean? How do we determine what should be significant? P-value meaningless. Let's do this. It's
important to kind of talk about what people are looking for in statistics. And I think what people are looking for, the whole point of statistics, right, is to show that something isn't chance. And a lot of that is about, making sort of a bit of predictions, but trying to say that, if you were to do the study again, that you should get similar results. So, if you did repeated observations, you should find this proof again, right? If I measure liking in a population, it should be done appropriately enough that if I were to go back to the same sort of population, I should get the same amount of liking, right?
Absolutely. And I think the other thing to consider is if you don't get that when you do a repeated test, you have to really, that's where you dive in and do critical analysis on, okay, what is the reason that this was varying? And that is, kind of helping progress the research design as well to make it better and more, more sound.
Absolutely.
Just kind of looking at the evidence includes, right? And then the 4 lists, that kind of almost even when you're thinking about claims and sort of proof, that kind of goes in a cycle, right? Like it's recognizing limits. Okay, well, is this still valid? Are we under the same conditions? Do we have the same stressors? Yeah, it's kind of a cyclic.
Absolutely, because you do have to keep thinking about all these things as you're going through developing your proof, right? And, some of that is done in claims research, but I think we're in an interesting situation, and this is why I think it's really cool to bring Martha into this conversation. We're in an interesting situation with CBD. So if you're not familiar with hearing the term CBD, I don't know where you've been, but CBD is basically, we're talking about any products that have cannabis in it, essentially, right? I mean, in consumer terms.
Yeah, so probably we've seen, as consumers, we've seen CBD the most. It is one of the cannabinoids that is in a bevy of cannabinoids that we find in cannabis. But CBD is probably the safest one to talk about for the US market, and the one that's kind of most infamous or famous right now. Yeah.
Yeah. And we call it the Wild West right now because there's a lot going on with it, right? There's regulations or lack thereof. There is legality or lack thereof. And there is essentially no consumer testing, right? So it's a consumer product. It could be in the form of an edible like a gummy. It could be a tincture, oil that you're dripping into your mouth. It could be in your lotion. It could be in your shampoo. It could be in your essential oil kit. I don't know where you're putting it or what you're doing with it, vaping, anything you can imagine, people are putting CBD into it, whether it's even like a lip product, right? People are putting it into everything. And, there's no real research being done, standardized, I would say, whether it's for the claims, because in some ways people slap the name CBD on it and people assume that it has all sorts of, miraculous benefits, or there's no regulation. So there's nobody saying you can't say that yet, right? And in some cases, maybe they're starting to, but there's also just general consumer research of making sure that the flavors you're combining or the product you're putting it in are appropriate or, working, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that it's important to mention too, that consumers might have a misunderstanding of what CBD is. So maybe they confuse CBD with weed, or they think that it's something else. So there's even just the basic understanding of what its expectations are of CBD and what the consumer expectation is of CBD. Because if you're purchasing it thinking that you're going to get an effect that you would get with something like marijuana, and then you consume it and you're assuming you're going to have that, you're going to have a misunderstanding of whatever you're about to experience next. And I think there's also a lot of subjectivity to CBD because we don't have that research yet about what effect it has on certain populations, what happens if it mixes with certain medications, or what medications it shouldn't mix with. So there's a lot of unknowns right now in this area of,
It's really going the way of like the essential oil crowd, right? Where there's like such a halo effect around it that people want to apply it to everything. But I would kind of throw this maybe to Alyssa a little bit. So Alyssa, what are your thoughts around CBD? Do you think that it's widely accepted? Do you think a lot of people are using it in their everyday products?
Yeah, just from going to the grocery store, I see how many products they've added it to. You can basically go to any store and buy it. So it's definitely being more widespread use.
Yeah, and at the same time, I don't know that anybody really understands what it is, right? Which is kind of scary. And, something that, I think we've always been proud about at HCD, oddly enough, is our ability to say we don't know, right? So I think a lot of times people come to us and want definitive answers on exactly what something is or exactly how something works. But there is power in saying we don't know, but let's find out. So, when we've had clients come to us to want to do CBD type of research, there's been a lot of unknowns in that. And, we've had to tell clients, well, I don't know if you can do that, or we don't know the actual answer to something, but we are going to do our best to find out, right? So there's lots of different types of research, whether it's physiological to try to help out with a claim, like to show that there's a change in stress, or maybe a behavioral change, right? A subjective change on someone's perception of pain, whatever it might be that they're using for that. There are tests that we can run, but there are some answers that are going to be hard to determine, right, in the design, or where's an appropriate place. I think a big question is even, can it be done in a consumer testing facility, or does it have to be done on a clinical site? And I think there's some variations in that, the answer, right? Because it is kind of, we don't know. But Martha, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think I find it difficult these days to figure out where and when to make that clinical versus consumer decision. It's it's not like alcohol where we just get licenses and everything is fine. And, as long as you're this old, you can participate. We don't know. So there are a lot of those sorts of, well, what if we get somebody sick with it? Because you haven't tried it before. You don't know what your tolerance or sensitivity or allergy or whatever.
And that's why you would do it at a clinical site, because then you have more caution, right? You have medical staff, you have adverse reaction systems in place, right?
Yeah, where with just a cream or a beverage or something, we wouldn't typically think of that. But here, yeah, you wanna be kind of straddling somewhere between clinical and consumer, because there are so many times when we have to say we don't know. We're gonna find out now, or we're not, and it's not gonna be important, but one way or another. And there are interactions with other medications, exactly, right? Like if you if you can't eat grapefruit because of the medications you're on, then definitely talk to your doctor before gobbling a gummy that's 100 milligrams of CBD. It might be a concern. So a lot of those unknowns.
And I think it's useful to mention that even if we don't know, for something of less drastic, maybe you're not as, you've already figured out that you want to do it in a clinical setting to be cautious with that. There still is options where you can do a pilot study to test out other lesser unknowns of a lesser degree of, obviously someone's health is most important, but there are so many other things that you have to consider. So by doing a smaller sample with a pilot study, you do have the option of finding out directional results to say, do you even want to go forward with this, or maybe try a different route with a different pilot study? So there are a bunch of options when trying to sort through this Wild West.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And even like to say, we should lean more clinical. It doesn't mean it has to be done under clinical conditions in a clinical setting as you would, an invasive drug study.
I think another piece of this is, again, getting back to like the more consumer product aspect of it, is that there's really, a lot of the companies that are starting in the CBD area are very small and new. And so they don't have these established consumer testing groups within their organizations, right? But something has to start somewhere. So, they might be doing decently right now just by in-house saying, oh, we like these flavors, or we like this format. But a lot of value, the reason that so many large CPG companies are able to be successful is because they have consumer research that is learning and really getting the proof that, certain flavors are working best. And, especially if you're thinking about going from a mom and pop type of organization to being, global, or just larger and being able to get to more mass market. I think when you get on mass market, you really have to consider your consumer research to make sure that you are giving people a consistent product, meeting their expectations, like all sorts of hedonics issues, just, how much they're willing to pay. There's a lot of interesting research out there that could certainly help the industry, I would think.
Absolutely. And it doesn't have to be done with a psychophysiological measure. It could be done with a survey. That is a start for you to better understand your consumers.
But it certainly has to start somewhere, because I think it would improve a lot of the product experiences that people have, with any of these products. I'm thinking about tinctures in particular, because we have been approached by people to do tincture studies. And there are a lot of people out there talking about how they just don't taste good. And so I think there's research to be done there. There's certainly so much research to be done.
So much research.
When we say Wild West, it's not just because it's crazy, but also because it's wide open, right? We're talking about large plains of unknowns that we can work in at this point.
Absolutely. And an ever evolving global legal and regulatory landscape, right? Like what's legal in Canada isn't legal in the US, isn't legal in Europe or wherever, Australia. Like everybody is sort of in their own Wild West of cannabis right now.
And that kind of brings us to this next slide perfectly, because it's really complex. It's really crazy out there because, you know, whether or not something is legal in one state, it almost doesn't matter because federally it's illegal, right? So, you know, when we think about supplements and we think about consumer products, there are FDA issues potentially that we have to consider. So, you know, how will education really help navigate through these issues, all these complexities? It's a huge question. Kathryn, do you want to go over some of these points a little bit?
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, just to name a couple of them that are on this slide, it's talking about how much should you have within a gummy? What is the concentrations that are acceptable? And we have touched on this very briefly, but there are some ways that things like probiotics can get away with, where you can say you have this much in a bottle, but it's dispersed unevenly throughout the bottle. So maybe one gummy has a lot more of a higher concentration than another gummy. So working out, is that acceptable when somebody is using CBD for a medical use? Obviously not, because it has to be regulated. What form are you taking it in? Michelle had mentioned the tincture versus having a gummy. All of those things do impact the consumer experience as well as, you know, consumers' expectation. We did touch on combining it with other drugs. If you are taking medication daily, will that affect when it's interacting? Because the truth of the matter is that it's a chemical. So there's going to be chemical interactions that are happening when you are consuming it. And then, you know, there's things like the populations. Is this safe for children to take? Is it safe for somebody that's pregnant to take? Again, I think that talking about how when you're elderly, you're an older adult and you have a bunch of different medications that are working together, how that will affect your livelihood and just like your, you know, cons of having it. And finally, also just long-term effects is really something to be considered, because this is such a newer field and it's something that is being explored so openly now, where, you know, 20, 30, 40 years ago, this wasn't even as much of a thought. And what's really compelling is that, especially with the changes going on, we have to be up to date so that we understand what are the inconsistencies between having it legal in New Jersey versus having it legal in the United States as a whole. And keeping in mind these changing requirements, because it will change how you do your research and where you do your research.
Yeah, I think to Alyssa's point as well, you know, she's saying this, you go to a grocery store and you can see it. And I think when it comes to consumer perceptions, when they see it in their local grocery store, it's not like they went to some head shop, right? You know, or they're not buying it from, you know, some kiosk on the street. They're at their trusted grocery store. So I think that they have some sort of trust that research has been done, right? It's safe because I bought it at my grocery store, or I bought it at my pharmacy, you know, CVS, right, or Walgreens. You expect that it's safe for you to use. And whether or not that's true is a completely different conversation, but that's the perception, I would imagine. What do you think, Alyssa?
Yeah, I feel like the CBD oil especially just kind of came out of nowhere. I remember going to a farmer's market and basically every table had some form of it. And the previous year was just fruits and vegetables.
That is a really good point, right? But it's quite different when you're buying it from a local farmer and then you go to CVS and it's there, right?
Yeah.
So like, I think that you might be, you know, you might have some questions about its quality if you bought it from someone local, right? But when you think it's mass produced and it's like in a national chain, then you're probably like, oh, someone's done the research on this, right?
Yeah.
Alyssa, I'm curious, do you have any recollection of the claims that were put on the box, or even just like the way that it was?
The farmer's market, yeah.
Yeah, it had like a theme to it or anything like that?
Yeah, it's always just the picture of the leaf, and it always claims to have medicinal properties. It's therapeutic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Properties.
Which can mean a lot of things, right?
Right. And it's our job as market researchers to really ensure that whatever's being shared on those bottles are something that you can interpret within a reasonable scope, because just like Martha was doing this before, like, what are medicinal properties? Like, what does that entail? So, we want to make sure that we have the evidence to support those claims and make it so that way it's clear to the consumer or whoever, even if you're passing it in the drugstore or if you're passing it at the farmer's market, that they know what they're taking. And it really does. Those claims set the expectation as to what a consumer is hoping for. So it's so important to keep up to date with it.
Yeah, I don't know how many people really ask the farmer at the farmer's market to prove the medicinal qualities, right? Yeah, but I guess another problem is out there is that probably if you're at the farmer's market and you see that claim, you could look up CBD on your phone, Google it, and see, it has medicinal properties, because it does, right? But what does that mean for you personally as an individual is a different question. And I think that's where the complexity really comes in.
Yeah, big time. And something just to that point quickly, now with COVID and vaccines coming out and everything, people are asking, well, what should I do? Should I get the vaccine? Should I wait? Should I this? I don't know. You should talk to your doctor.
Yeah.
You have
the
a
power
person
and I don't
for
know.
that. Yeah. Like I can tell you what I'm going to do for myself personally, but I cannot advise you on
but honestly,
for yourself.
If you ask your doctor, your doctor's going to say something very similar. They can give you, they don't want to tell you exactly what to do necessarily. So something, I found a lot more recently is when you do ask your doctor for very specific advice, that they're going to say, well, here's the facts. Here's where you're at. You can certainly test, you can certainly take the vaccine. But I can't tell you for sure what's going to happen to you, right? Because there are adverse events, and there's a lot of, good things too. But there's a lot of unknowns as well, whether it's CVD or, COVID symptoms or diagnosis or vaccines. This is an ever-changing world. And so I think this kind of applies to everything we're talking about. There's new information coming out all the time. There's research that is being done. So we do need to just continue to be willing to update our own beliefs as new information comes in. We need to make sure to learn, and we need to make sure to pay attention to the proof. Don't just go by, Facebook mom groups or a quick Google search or a YouTube video. Like, you want to look at actual numbers, actual proof that show, either safety or proof of medicinal, effects or whatever it might be. And these things are going to have to change. So what we know today might evolve tomorrow. But that's the great thing about knowledge, is that it grows, and we have to grow with it.
Absolutely. And that's also go with what science is. It's a hypothesis. And
sometimes we're wrong.
Yeah. It's,
and that's okay.
Hypotheses.
Totally okay.
And that's the great thing about science, is that it is growing and it's updating. And I think what's great that when you have these people in place, so you have a doctor in place to help you know your risks. You have, the market researchers to help you decide if this claim is honest. You have these almost like a sense of authority when you do have the research behind it, because even if they can't tell you if it's good or bad, they can tell you the risk and help you get educated on the risk. So that way you can make an educated decision for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. You should talk to your doctor, but likely they're going to say it's ultimately your decision. And it's best if you get all the information that you need, right? So, that's how you make an educated decision. And educated decisions are made off of looking into the proof. So there you go. We've come full circle on why we love proof, why it's so important, why we need to continue adding to it. So happy everybody could join us. So happy to have Alyssa join us, and hopefully we can have her on again before her internship is done. So glad to have Martha join us once again, because she's such a great and knowledgeable person on these topics. So please, if you liked what you saw, or even if you don't like it, just go ahead and subscribe to us. Like our video below, make a comment, share with others. So subscribe, hit the button, share, like, thumbs up, all these things. If you have other questions, you can comment below, or you can just contact us directly. You can email any of us, you can tweet with us, you can visit our blog, you can link with us. Any of these things, please reach out. We love to hear from you. We'd love to hear your ideas on, future conversations. That would be awesome. But thank you for joining us, and everybody have a great rest of your day. Happy Valentine's Day, should it be around that time when you're watching this. Otherwise, we still love you and we love proof. So thank you.
All right, everybody, take care.
Thank you.